Hi, my name is Jan Wilczek from WolfSound.com. Welcome to WolfTalk, a podcast about audio programming. In this podcast, you will learn how to build your career in programming or research related to audio, meet programmers and researchers from all around the world, and learn about the intricacies of sound. Hi everyone, and welcome to the 27th episode of the WolfTalk podcast. Today, as usual, I have a very special guest, Geraint Luff, a freelancer in the area of audio DSP, also known as the Signalsmith. I think he's most famous for his audio developer conference talks called Let's Write a Reverb and 4 Ways to Write a Pitch Shifter, but he contributed to the community in various other ways, not to mention his incredibly friendly attitude, which you'll soon discover. In the podcast, we discuss how Geraint learned digital audio signal processing and programming without following university programs specific to these fields. We also discuss how he transitioned into audio DSP freelancing and how you can follow his footsteps. As usual, all the people, places, and references mentioned in this podcast episode can be found in the episode notes at thewolfsound.com/talk027. Once again, it's thewolfsound.com/talk027. And if you want to help the podcast, then please subscribe to the WolfSound YouTube channel and give a thumbs up on this video. Please consider also leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and suggest in the comments on YouTube who you would like to see as a guest in a future podcast episode. Finally, if you'd like to become someone like Geraint, someone who is paid for writing software that processes sound, but you don't know how to approach signal processing, I have a solution for you. Getting into audio development is kind of like surfing. Looks incredible on the outside and feels amazing when you do it. But how do you even start? That's why I encourage you to check out my DSP Pro online course. It's a great all-in-one learning package to finally understand audio processing, even if you don't have maths, programming, or engineering background. There are many musicians, sound engineers, web developers, and students who have already gone through the course. The course covers everything you need to know on audio DSP, from the basics through frequency processing, filters, efficient implementation structures, up to audio formats and audio effects. And if you're looking for one-on-one guidance, you can choose a package that covers sessions mentored by me, which will allow you to further boost your results and get all your questions asked. I believe in this course so much that I give a 30-day money-back guarantee. After you purchase the course, you have 30 days to return it if you don't like it. If you're interested, you can find more details at wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. Once again, it's wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. And now, Geraint Luff. Hi, Geraint. Thanks for agreeing on this interview. Could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, it's good to be here. I'm Geraint. I'm now Signalsmith of Signalsmith Audio, which has been going for coming up to 5 years now. And I am a sort of mathematician, DSP, specialist person, developer, and I run the company along with my partner, Elena.
Okay, awesome. And we'll definitely go over the company details in this interview. But I'd first, of course, like to go back, to your roots. And could you share maybe how did your interest in music start?
Yeah, I think it's always been there. I was, as a child, I was, drumming rhythms on stuff, and I think that's pretty common. But my parents got me music lessons when I was quite young. Started out with the piano, and then when I was 8 or so, picked up the violin as well. But around the same time, I was already programming, because my older brother was learning, and I got jealous. And my dad, who's an excellent teacher, started teaching me as well. So pretty early on, I was messing around with the beeps that PCs could make and sequencing little tunes out of that in QBasic. So yes, I've been interested in music for about as long as I've been interested in programming, which is sort of about as early as I can remember at this point.
Nice. And do you remember, Sue, what was the programming language?
QBasic.
QBasic. Okay, sorry. Yeah. So you said that. So is it like a flavor of what then Microsoft sold as BASIC?
Absolutely, yeah. It was sort of shipped on all the Windows 95 computers. Okay. And it was it wasn't a good language, but you use what you had, and you could do hello world, and you could draw things on the screen. It was perfect for 8-year-old me.
I mean, Microsoft seems to, got very well out of BASIC, so I assume it's useful. And so you were also learning DSP at that time already? I
mean, maybe not when I was 8, but I do remember when I was 12, like in the car on the way home from school. This was the era of Napster and like burgeoning music piracy, and all. People at school, I kept hearing people talk about MP3s, and I was already working enough with audio to know that a WAV file was pretty big and an MP3 file was pretty small. And so I asked my dad, how does MP3 encoding work? And I just remember this like kind of silence as he kind of thought how to fit this into like 12-year-old me's brain, and then he did it. So I was already messing around with sound and sine waves and harmonics and like kind of very, very basic stuff back then, but I was interested already in that kind of area.
Awesome. And so did this somehow led you, to certain direction of studies or, school choice, etc.?
Not really. I mean, I always just reckon that if you keep studying stuff you find interesting, then you'll eventually end up qualified to do something interesting with your skills. And that's pretty much how I went. And I was really into just maths on its own, like pure maths as well. So that's what I did my degree in here at Cambridge. And yeah, music was also something I had lessons, piano and violin until I was 16, 18. I was in choirs, I did all that. And then at the same time, programming as a hobby, but like the only thing I'm qualified in is a bachelor's in maths, and then when I graduated, I was meant to be working for a company, but it was 2009 and everyone's finances were on fire, so I couldn't do that. And then I was just like, well, what else can I do? I can program, and so then did a bit of a programming career. But I've not been very much of a planner, because I tend to, as I say, just reckon that if you collect interesting skills, then you'll end up doing interesting things with them. So that's my plan.
Okay. And so what I read from your bio, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like during your studies, you had like your first, let's say, official audio DSP experience at Meridian Audio. Like, is it correct? And just to remember?
So they actually sponsored me through university. That was meant to work for them when I graduated. But it was a tricky time for a lot of companies. So yeah, I mean that was really good, and it's strange to go back now and kind of think what my career would have looked like if I'd gone straight into audio. Because actually what happened was instead I went and worked on a programming startup. They were doing app development. This was like the very first version of Android at the time. So it was a little bit of iOS stuff, like the first Android phones, the G1, and it wasn't something I had skills in. I was learning Java on the job. I learned Objective-C on the job, and it was very scrappy. And then I kind of bounced around like a few different areas, and some of them were interesting and some of them were really boring. But there was really cool stuff in there, and I almost never ended up doing the job that I thought I was going to do when I joined. Mm-hmm. So, I joined at a certain point a company that was doing like high-speed financial data communication stuff. And I thought I was going to be doing C++, and ended up doing web development for kind of like their internal management tools for their fleet. And then I went and thought I'd be going and doing sort of more, I guess, embedded stuff, maybe at ARM. And then ended up actually working sort of in more R&D stuff and doing a bunch of like more abstract future thinking things in a bunch of different languages. And then, yeah, when I went to Amazon, I started there not as anything audio related. Like my work wasn't, I was just an embedded programmer. We were making some like a camera thing, which like this is before they acquired Ring. And, you know, at a certain point, I was just like, the audio on this device, this speaker is atrocious, and I want to fix it. So I grabbed a meeting room with like the padded walls and ran some sine sweeps and just put a little, you know, a notch that basically killed everything at 2 kilohertz, because that's where the really bad rattling was. And my colleagues were like, a wizard! Because, you know, the differential of like, that wasn't what they hired me for, and there wasn't anyone on the team who was an audio specialist. And I had this skill set, which I just kind of, you know, dipped my fingers into just to kind of sort this one issue out. And they were like, all right, let's get this guy like an actual like room with the foam on the walls and give him the title of audio research scientist, which was very good from like a CV perspective, but it absolutely wasn't the work that I was doing most of the time I was there. So yeah, I kind of pinballed around, and, you know, there were really fun challenges along the way. Like, because I had the maths background as well, when I was at ARM, I was doing a lot of bits of cryptographic protocols and like data integrity and like all those things that were really fun. And yeah, and at the same time, always had this side hobby of writing audio effects and playing with sound in this kind of this fascination that you can, this thing that I loved, which you could hear and you could actually play with it, like in the computer with Python or whatever language you were working on at the time. Like I would more or less always bend it towards audio. You can't do much audio in PHP, but I did try.
Okay, yeah, that's actually good to know, because I was curious about this, if you can do something audio related there. But yeah, on this note, I wanted to ask, like, did any of the skills that you acquired in your, let's say, non-audio era kind of transfer into your audio era when you were already doing audio development? Did something from that period helped you?
I think all of it helps you. It's a bit like, you know, doing a qualification in, well, if you do a qualification that's in DSP, then you're very sort of set up to be fired straight at the audio industry. But a lot of the skills, I think, across programming transfer really well. So audio programming is not that different from all other forms of programming, all the way up until you get to some hard audio maths, you know. And even then you can kind of, if you've got that understanding of having messed around in any kind of music software or DAW or anything, then you can already start doing the audio bits. You can use Audio Kit, you can use, you know, Juice as sort of built-in filters and kind of understand what you're doing meaningfully and be an audio programmer. And it's not actually black magic, you know, from the get-go. You can get really deep into it, and I find that very satisfying. But yeah, I think all of it, you know, I did a bit of web development, and I'm not a web developer. I haven't really been a web developer for at least a decade. But now everyone's putting web UIs in their plugins, and I'm like, well, I could get by in JavaScript. You know, there's, I think, as long as you're doing work that keeps you interested and engaged, I think that's the thing, then you're always growing some bit of your brain, and you don't need to know when it's going to turn out to be useful.
Okay, that's very beautiful advice, and I really want to believe that to be true, because then it's a wonderful reality that we live in. Yeah, so I sit mostly in audio, so it's hard for me to compare. Yeah, but I think it's also an important message, to everyone who wants to transition into audio programming from a different programming language than what's prevalent in audio programming, or in general to this area, from some, let's say, sound engineering background. So yeah, like you did your little, let's say, detour around the companies, but then it seems that in 2020, you, after this Amazon experience, you decided to start freelancing in the audio DSP domain. And why this change now to kind of drop like a safe position and just go full in on DSP?
I mean, in terms of motivation, my job wasn't really interesting me at that point. And some of it was a confidence thing as well, both technical in terms of most of the audio development I've been doing had not been anything in C or C++. I bounced off C++ when I was younger. I tried learning it quite early and I found it horrendous. I still don't get on with like build systems and stuff where it's middleware, and I don't know, it's all horrible. So I did a lot of my teenage messing around in Python with fantastic like signal processing and numeric stuff that they have, and then later did a lot of stuff in Reaper's JSFX language, which is a just-in-time compiled language that's built into the DAW, so there's no complication. It's not related to JavaScript, but it's as simple as writing JavaScript in that it's just text files you throw around and you copy it onto someone else's computer and then they have the effects too. So that was kind of where I was at, and that's not really a pro audio skill set, you could say, but like the understanding I got from that was incredibly valuable. And then once I had been through enough jobs that I was familiar with C, at a certain point I was like, you know what, actually I'm reaching the limits of this language, and I made a jump. And the other half of the confidence is, my partner, who has been extremely supportive, and we regularly take sort of little breaks or leaps in different directions. And so while I had a steady salary, she'd go and do some startup stuff, which was a bit ropey and like not super paying well until they got funding. And then I quit my job and took 6 months off and released an album or two or whatever. And so that was, that personal stability, as well as that kind of feeling that I was ready to take that challenge on. Now, I did decide, in my great wisdom, to put in my resignation in, I think, about February 2020, which meant that when I actually cleared out my office and on my desk, it was in this completely empty office. And I was just seeing these like goodbye emails pop up on my computer in this desert of corporate grey, and it was incredibly surreal. And everyone's like, oh, when this is over in a month, we'll all go out for drinks. And then none of that happened. So it was a strange time. But I think the biggest thing that actually gave me the leap was community, because I didn't start straight into audio, and I don't have an academic background. I didn't have an industry context for any of this. So my interest in audio for the most of my programming career has been incredibly lonely, to be honest. I had no one to talk to who really understood this thing that I was obsessed with. And it was really tough. I'd occasionally be able to tell another sort of non-audio technical person about some of the things I was doing. But there was no one really except my dad, my brother as well, who understood some of this stuff. Like, he's also a fantastic programmer and had been doing bits of audio things, but like, I didn't really have that kind of sense of being in a place where other people around me really got the audio thing that meant so much to me. And then, yeah, around early 2020, I went to an audio meetup in London, and I think I went to 2 audio meetups, and one of them I joined the Audio Programmer Discord. And then, yeah, once I don't know, I just realized that actually this stuff kind of exists, and I could make that leap, and so I did.
Okay, nice. And then how did you find your first gig? Kind of like, was it through the Discord?
It was, yeah. And actually, from that one seed, a lot of things happened, because what they asked me to do was to write a reverb. I had been, I can't say I've been studying reverbs, but like, it's something that I had thought about. I learnt a lot of things the hard way. I didn't, this isn't a brag, it's more of a confession that I didn't really do reading, I didn't do proper structured research, because this was all something I was doing off my own bat. There was no one I could ask, what's the good book on this? And so I was, writing delay lines and loops, and like, if you get enough of these, you can get something that's kind of echoey, and it's like, actually, I've got enough maths to kind of put the matrix in there. And like, over the course of like 2 years, slowly figured out something that would now take you about 30 minutes to understand if you had the right textbook. But it meant that, there's a lot of the stuff that I bashed my way through and built up slowly over that period of taking the career detour. And then someone asked me to write a reverb, and I thought, I'm going to write one so idiot-proof that I can't mess it up. Like, that I don't have to tune anything, because I don't think I have that kind of tinkering, detail-y mindset. I feel like if there are lots of subtle decisions where you're like dialing in something like that, then I've probably done something wrong in my design, right? That's not a universal rule. That's just like my personal preference.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's an interesting approach. Very, engineering focus, I'd say.
Yeah, I feel like if you're doing the right conceptual things, then the results you want should fall out relatively easily, instead of having to like carefully balance like a tower of cards. And that's more about how I like to work and the kinds of things I feel are satisfying to write. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I wrote this for this client, and then asked which bits I could talk about and so on. And then that became a talk I gave at the audio program, and that became my first ADC conference talk. And then that was pretty much it. Like, once I joined the Discord, had my first gig, and given an ADC talk, then I was Signalsmith. I had stepped into this. It was a username I'd been using for a while, but like, I really feel sometime in 2020, 2021, I like fully embodied this role that I had been really wanting for a while. So I've been saying for a while now that I do kind of have my dream job at the moment, which is really, really good.
Okay, cool. That's super cool. I also very much like the nickname, by the way. So like, I think it's very profound in its meaning. So it's too bad that it's occupied already.
Yeah.
Let's pause here for a moment. Geraint is a DSP expert, but it takes more than DSP knowledge to create a full-fledged audio plugin. Fortunately, it's not so hard if you're using Juice. Juice is an open-source, cross-platform C++ application development framework that makes it easy to create audio software, as well as audio plugins and plugin hosts. You can write code once and build VST, AU, AUV3, AAX, and LV2 plugins on Windows, macOS, iOS, Android, and Linux, as well as embedded platforms. I've been successfully using Juice since 2018, both in my private and professional projects, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. I especially like how Juice makes it easy for beginners to jump right into creating audio plugins and applications without worrying about C++ quirks. Juice is used by the majority of the world's most important audio companies, but it is free for personal use and there is affordable pricing available for companies just starting out. Apart from the framework itself, Juice has an amazing community of users gathered in the Juice forum, which is a great resource to learn audio programming on its own. Most recently, the Juice team has released Juice version 8, which contains many new features including WebView plugin UIs, which is very exciting. To start using Juice now, go to juice.com, download Juice and follow their Getting Started guide. I have also put a link to it in the description. Have fun creating audio apps and plugins. And now, back to the interview. So on the basis of this success, which is, I think, a very good recipe in and of its own, so get into the community, try to land at least one contract, and then possibly do a conference talk, or in parallel. That's already going quite a long way towards making it in the audio industry. So I think it's great that you are such an example for people to follow. And out of these, this first gig and this conference talk, did other requests follow for you to do another Reverb or something similar?
Yeah. So it's very good to be visible. I'm not a great networker. I'm not good at, well, actually, my first ADC, I had these business cards because I felt super awkward about the whole thing. And they had a bunch of completely ridiculous job titles on them because I felt less ashamed because I just felt like a awkward kind of imposter. But then I'd walk around and be like, oh, I've got a monkey banging on a typewriter and 2 nap artists, which one do you want? And that kind of took some of the edge off for me. But yeah, the main thing is just sharing the things that I did understand and felt I could explain. And I have to say, it wasn't, I went straight for the conference talk. I started this as a sort of a blog post that then I realized could be given as a talk. And then I actually gave it at Josh's sort of YouTube channel on tap and other things first. And so I really milked that Reverb design for quite a while and that talk.
Okay, and I was just curious because some of my students also, watched this talk and followed this and were really, impressed with your style. And I've also seen the talks, and to me, they're very well structured, very understandable. That's what also people in YouTube comments say, which, as you know, on YouTube is a rare thing to give kind of this positive feedback. But in all seriousness, I was just curious if you had any prior teaching experience. Because you said that your dad was a very good teacher. So did you also teach other people, or is it kind of natural?
I've always been interested in it. I think my dad gave me a great example because he, again, it's never worked as a teacher formally, but he just, there would be this moment when you could see him trying to fit an idea into a shape that would go into my head. And I think one of the core things that taught me is that it's okay to come at something from any angle, as long as it's not if it's not false, then it's useful. If that makes sense. I think there's a common issue where people say, oh, well, I understand this in its full depth all the way down to the equations, and I would like to teach it to you from the ground up. And I find that that's not the creative space in which I think. Like, I do a lot of stuff where I know, push comes to shove, I could write out the equations for what I'm doing. But that's not how I started. I was messing around with the FFT in Python when I was a teenager. And I knew what it was. I had the idea of like vector spaces and stuff from maths at school, but like, I only really covered that when I was sort of like 15, 16. Didn't really have calculus before I was 15, 16. And then at university, first year of university, I looked the equation for the Fourier transform like in the face. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand what this is. But I hadn't started there. And so I very much believe that you can have a kind of formal isn't the wrong word, but like a rigorous understanding of what something does without having to start at the very detailed, like, equation-based view. And so I think that's the way that I like to communicate as well. And a lot of it comes from my dad as an example and how he taught me, because there was no way I would be able to understand those things. Like when I was, I don't know, 10 or so, I wanted to rotate stuff on the screen. I wanted to draw I was making a little racing game. And I wanted to rotate things. And he was like, I have to teach this kid trigonometry. And I went to bed and told my mum, Daddy's been telling me the best things about triangles. Because, it was I had a goal and that was motivating, but also only needed to learn a rigorous and like solid understanding of just enough to get to what I wanted to do. And I think that was a very powerful way to kind of approach learning, not as this abstract chore of, brick and mortar, but like the vision. You build one thing, and then your interests pull you, and they pull you, and they pull you, and then you find out that one day you've built up a very broad and solid understanding of some very complex topics. And I admit it in some way is a luxury to be able to do that over 20 years instead of over a 3-year course before you're fired directly at an audio company and expected to do productive work. So I'm not holding this up as an example for how I reckon people should shape their careers, but I think it definitely means that's the way I like to give my presentations as well. I like to kind of, this stuff is fun and it's not that inaccessible, So the thing I really loved about that Reverb talk was being able to say, if you know what a matrix is, great. If you don't know what a matrix is, here is just enough of what an orthogonal matrix is that you understand why it's useful. Just hold that, and that's all of it that we need, and not make people learn an entire amount of linear algebra to make a reverb, even though that's incredibly useful. But make the reverb first, and then get really obsessed with it, and then learn the rest of the linear algebra on the way. That's definitely my motivation for how I sort of structure these explanations.
I think it's a very beautiful piece of advice. So like going from kind of, practice, like playing with these things, and then kind of the desire to build something similar yet different, or to understand simply how a thing works, and then go through the principles, and maybe, just maybe, eventually end up with the equations on paper, but not if it's actually, but if it's not needed, then it's also fine to just ditch them. And I think it's a very beautiful approach also of, learning through various aspects of a particular concept. And obviously at the very end, trying to teach it to someone else, then like your understanding becomes fully grounded, of course. But that's something I can take for myself as well. So thank you for this advice. And, did your next talk, which I believe is also very successful, the 4 ways to write a pitch shifter. Like, was it also based, off your contracting work? And did you have a similar approach to this?
No.
Why are you laughing?
Well, at some point, like in, 2018, I did sort of look at going to some conferences when I was looking at places to get involved. And I looked at ADC, which I think was still very much more juice focused back then. Mm-hmm. And I was like, ugh, I'm not paying for that. So when I gave the Reverb talk, I was like, yeah, free ticket. And so next year, when it came to submission time, I was like, well, I should submit something again. And to be honest, 4 Ways to Write a Pitch Shifter, great title. I didn't have 4 ways to do it. I didn't have like the kind of abstract, like, actually, the talk I wanted to give was a different one. And it would be called something else like Thinking in Time and Frequency, and like just kind of a development of how you can, moving from the time domain to spectral to kind of wavelets and that kind of, and it was very dry. It was the opposite of what I was just saying, where there was no motivation to it. It was just information. And I couldn't make a talk around that. And I realized that at every stage and every perspective, there is some way to do pitch shifting. And so that's what I submitted as my talk, and then it got accepted. And then I went, oh no. And because I had like maybe 2.5 ways to write a pitch shifter at the time. And then I kind of ended up doing maybe 3 months of unpaid R&D to really like deep dive and read what papers I could get my hand on and do experiments and all sorts of stuff to get the pitch shifter, and ends up with something I'm really proud of, and the open source pitch shifter has then been quite widely used at this point. Like people actually, it's out there in the wild. And the talk went really well, but also I didn't do it the next year because I was just like, I'm just going to pay for my ticket. that was a lot. So yeah, really, really proud of that. But again, it was this, I wanted this idea, which is the way of thinking about sound in this kind of spectral wavelet subband like perspective from like lots of different angles, and you had to hook it on something interesting and motivating, and there has to be a reward at every stage. And yeah, maybe this is saying something about my personal my brain, because I do, full disclosure, I have ADD, and I find it very difficult to progress through something without a very tangible and immediate reward. Like, I loved web development because there was very visual feedback.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
When you're making audio stuff and you can hear it immediately. But again, part of my problem with build systems is like, you write something, press OK, it doesn't work, and you're just like, oh. It takes a lot of grit to get through that. And something I've learned about myself personally is I don't have a lot of that. So focusing my work and my thought patterns and the things I like to do to kind of naturally insulate myself against that by working in this very exploratory space, working with these these steps where there's always something interesting just around the corner, and you get this kind of constant feedback. And yeah, so that's how I structured the talk. And then I took a year off because it was a bit much.
Yeah, I can totally understand you. Also, like this preparing a talk can be very demanding, and obviously no one is paying for this. So
well, as I say, this is sort of my networking tactic. So everyone was asking me for reverbs, and then I gave the pitch shifting talk, and then everyone started asking me about pitch shifters. And they started asking for specific things, which I wildly underestimated the complexity of, and then got stuck doing another 8 months of interesting but underpaid R&D. And yeah, like it's Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. Yeah.
I understand. And I was just wanted to ask, because you said that you started writing the open source library after the ADC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what you wrote on your blog.
That's correct.
So I was just curious, did it also take you a lot of time, or since you were already so much in the zone that you were just like, bam, let's just write this and here we go?
So the main thing about it was sort of the algorithms. So I'd written example code for my presentation. Like what you hear in the presentation was real code that I'd written, but it wasn't formatted in a way that was reusable at all. You couldn't modulate parameters. Like it was example code. And I'd added this and will release an open source thing, kind of just to push myself. I was just like, when I was submitting my my talk proposal, I just kept upping and upping and upping, and then almost delivered. But no, it's more that the time was spent getting the algorithms and my own understanding up to speed, and that meant that I gave the talk, had about a week off, and then wrote most of Signalsmith Stretch in about a week. And then there's been a long tail of cleanups and enhancements and what happens if you want to seek through the audio, or format compensation, or other things that's sort of been tweaking and tuning over time, which has been really nice. But yeah, that initial burst was definitely fueled by the momentum of having had it right there in my brain.
Nice. And maybe last question I wanted to ask you on your talks is that, I also told you once in person that I really love your visuals, right? So you always have very informative, very beautiful also, and well-structured, clever visuals to accompany your talk. So you really show people, instead of, just overwhelming them with equations, what you want them to understand. So could you share maybe one thing, what are the tools that you're using to produce these visuals? And the other thing, of course, is how do you come up, with these creative visualization ideas?
Yeah, so in terms of tools, I do the drawings there's an online tool called Excalidraw, which is great. I actually have a custom fork of it. I've scanned my own handwriting in, and I've put my own color scheme as the defaults in, that kind of thing. So that's a little bit personalized, just because then it feels like it's mine. But it's a great piece of software. And I've also done plots with originally Python. Now I've got my own sort of plotting library in C++. But in terms of what I need to draw, I've always been someone who waves their hands around when I'm explaining stuff, and that's because I'm very visual. I'll kind of be and then you kind of view it from this angle, and it's if it's spread out in this direction, then it can be focused in this way. And so a lot of my diagrams are pretty much translations of how I would wave my hands in midair if I could. So a lot of my talks and blog posts, actually, I'll sometimes record myself as if I'm reading them out and referring to diagrams that don't exist yet. Imagine you can summon the perfect diagram, and then you have to back it up by drawing those diagrams. But sort of that perfect dream-like, sort of when you're explaining something in the shower to yourself, and you're and that's pretty much where it is. And then I sort of have to back this up. And by this point, I'm quite practiced at drawing these things in particular tools. But it comes from just starting with the explanation and then backing that up with the diagrams that I sort of want to be able to refer to, if that makes sense.
Nice. So but that makes perfect sense. And okay, so you kind of you were able to make the leap into audio development. So could you maybe share, how over these last 4 years, so since 2020, what were kind of the projects you work on? Are there any interesting stories related to them? Is there something that, immediately comes to your mind?
Yeah. So I can't talk about the details of a lot of this stuff because I do a lot of custom algorithm development for people, which means I can't say it really how I did it because that's sort of what they paid me to find out. But I will say that there's been a lot of learning about how freelancing works and the pitfalls of that. It's been very good to be doing this alongside a partner with salary because it has not been, for most of the time, it has not been having to pay all the bills. And also we have a kid, right? And he's turned 3 recently. So a lot of that period that you asked about, he's been around, and I have been the sort of the default person because my partner has to go to work. That I've been doing 1 or 2 days when I can, but if everyone gets sick, and you have to preserve one person in the house who's still functional, then it's not me. So it's been. I feel at the moment we're at a really interesting stage with Signalsmith because my partner left her job and is now in Signalsmith much more actively, whereas she was before helping me, I think, but not sending emails as much and so on. So yeah, I think some of the pitfalls, I've had the clients who said they want one thing, but they don't really have a creative vision. And I prefer to quote by the project because my working patterns are so, I'm not very good at sitting down and doing 6 hours at a time, except accidentally. So I tend to quote by the project instead of by the day, and that's a luxury I have because of the financial stuff, but also a personal preference. And that generally works, but occasionally has meant that, someone said, oh, can you make this, make a pitch shifter, but we want the latency to be less than 10 milliseconds. And I was like, yeah, how hard could that be? And then I found out exactly how hard that is. And so that was tough. And there was lots of rounds of feedback where they were like, this isn't good enough, this sounds bad. And I was like, I know. Sorry. And I'd been paid a fixed fee for this. But in the end, I'm incredibly proud of how that works and how that sounded like I did it. And that a lot of learning happened along the way. And I now can confidently do that. It's just that, and then another thing that I will say is, in terms of stories and the perspective, I guess, of what it's like, knowing my strengths and learning my strengths has been a very long journey. I said in the beginning I'd started doing app development and so on, and I was actually chucked out of that job. I wasn't very productive at it, and I got stuck. And it wasn't that I couldn't do it. I was just kind of unmanaged issues and so on. But I thought I might just be terrible at programming, and it turns out that I am not very good at stuff I don't find interesting. And I needed to be in the right context. So I was really bad at one set of stuff and really good at another set of stuff. And it took a while to really get to the point where I felt like I was on home turf. And so as an audio developer, finding that niche has been really good. I made quite a few years ago now, a plugin called Cloud Chorus for it was for the KVR Developer Conference. So it's free because that's sort of part of the sort of conference competition. As part of the competition rules, it has to be free and free forever. And I did it because I kind of wanted to push myself, and I needed a deadline to kind of get myself in line for that. And I did it. It worked. I don't think that I ever made a Windows version of it. And what I kind of realized through the process of doing that is that, like, I really do want to make plugins, but I don't think I can do it on my own. And like a realistic assessment of what I find interesting and what I'm good at, which are very related, means that like things happen in partnerships, you know, and there are people who can do everything, and I absolutely salute them. And there are people who are a very particular shape, and we're still really valuable to some people. You know, you get a lot of teams of like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 people, and then they're making products, and then they hit some kind of mathematical brick wall, and that's when they get in contact with me. And you know, there's an ecosystem where there's lots of different things that you can bring to the table, and yeah, I think that's the biggest, in terms of like what it's like to be a freelancer. The biggest thing was learning that I'm valuable at all, and that I don't have to be everything. That I can, that I can bring certain things to the situation and be very valued, and then bonk off again and do the next interesting thing for me, which is, yeah, not really like a fun story in that, as you asked, but in terms of what it's like to be a contractor and be a freelancer, it's scary. Sometimes it's been a little bit, you know, the finances have been rocky. I'm not going to lie about that. It's not been immediately lucrative, but it's exactly what I want to be and doing the work that I want to be doing. So
nice. I think you could maybe do a talk, you know, at the ADC, and it's like about, you know, just the freelancing side of this, because I think this is addressing exactly a lot of people's concerns, right? That people are concerned that they don't know programming, or they aren't good enough in DSP already. They are concerned if they'll make this, you know, financially, etc. And like you could come in and draw a handful of nice diagrams and be like, this is how the audio industry works, like, you know. So I think that's there's an idea there, but I mean this, you know, in completely honest. Like I think that would be so very valuable, because a lot of people, you know, value your opinion also. So I think that would be very, very interesting.
Well, I in response, I'll say that I don't feel I know how the audio industry works. You know, it's much as I'm not good at the sort of business card jiu-jitsu. I'm not very savvy. I feel lucky that at the moment, you know, gigs keep coming in, people keep getting in touch, but I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. And I suppose that's actually pretty common. Like you have to be quite established before you're really like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. But as a freelancer, it's always, you know, you're going to fall off your surfboard at any moment, right? It's a precarious situation, and it's eventually you get relationships and repeat business and a reputation and people you worked with before who are like, oh yeah, they were good, and then you pass other people work, and you know, there's a lot of camaraderie when you find the other people who are also doing the same thing. But yeah, I definitely couldn't stand up on stage and say how the audio industry works, because I don't think I know.
Okay, fair enough then. So could you share, is Signalsmith Audio right now, is it you and your partner, or do you have some more collaborators?
No, it's just us. So for most of it, it's been almost entirely me. And my partner has been sort of helping me as like a person, but not, not checking up on leads, not like actually sort of engaging with the business, more supporting me, which has been incredibly valuable. Like I'm not understating that at all. So it's been like a 1.5 person team for quite a while, and now over the last like month or so, it's 2 people, and it feels like a new era. But no, it's just us. There's I think there's a lot of people who they manage to successfully look like a company, and then you get in contact and it's just one person, and it's like, hang on, your name is plural. Like that sort of that a lot of the industry seems to be this like little mesh network of people working with each other.
Yeah, I think it's a very good observation, like especially if they have, like some very serious name, I don't know, like Lions DSP International or something.
So many animals. So many animals in audio. What's this? Like, I think well over half of my clients have an animal themed name, and I don't quite, I guess we just love them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also what I heard. It suffices to show that you have a cat on YouTube, and that makes you instantly successful. Okay, yeah, but we're going off topic here, of course. I just wanted to ask you, because on your GitHub, apart from your Signalsmith Stretch and your plotting library and your DSP Basics library, I've also, like, correct me if I'm wrong, also seen some JavaScript code. So is it that you're also doing some web audio development as well?
Yeah, so at this point, because I do sort of algorithm development, like essentially I ship people like headless, like C++ classes, and then they sort of hook it up to dials and sparkly bits. And a lot of the time now I use Inscripton or other similar tool chains to compile stuff for WebAssembly, and that means I can send someone just a web link, which so they can listen to stuff and interact. It's not so far been something where I shipped like a product that way, but there is, I think, a lot of interest in it. I don't think it's going to be replacing native code just because of it's an extra layer. It's great. The web is fantastic for UIs. So I really do think that the web is going to be involved a lot in audio from that side of things. And there's an increasing number of like web-based pieces of software. But I think it's more of a branching out than like a sweeping replacement. I think that the web and browsers are like maturing into this point where you can run WebAssembly code, you can run C++ stuff, you can run Rust in your browser in the web page. And I think that's really cool. So I think what you might have seen was I've been in touch with some of I've been working with Clap. I moved over to Clap recently from VST3. And actually I've been, now I'm pretty much using the Clap API, but compiled to WebAssembly, which is, I think, really, really fun.
Nice.
I don't want to stand up and say that's the future, but I think it's very cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's also makes the development cycle so much easier, I think, right? That you can just send a link and then they can play with it in the browser. In contrast to having them install something on their computer, which is typically something, that comes at the end of product development cycle, right?
It's a big ask, yeah. And also just from my side, the build times for that kind of web stuff can be very fast. So as I was saying earlier about that kind of immediate feedback, run the command line thing that rebuilds and then refresh a web page. It's like a lot tighter feedback than, you click the button and it spends 3 minutes building and then like your door slowly like loads and then you load the project and then you press play. Like it feels a bit more snappy, a bit more flexible. So I actually do a lot of my development directly in the browser, and then later if someone needs it, I'll actually kind of wrap the same code up into a plugin and send it to them. But, that's personal preference. I'm not saying that's if you've got a good setup where you've got that immediate feedback, don't touch it, don't throw it away. This is what works for me, and I think there's a lot of potential in it for other people as well. But if if you've got something working, I didn't upgrade my laptop for almost a decade now. I had to move over because it's finally on its last legs. But I've been running a 2015 MacBook Pro for quite a while now. And I even had a newer computer. And I was just like, I don't want to set up my tool chain. Everything will break. I'll have to rewrite everything from scratch. And it's just like, no, I've got my scripts. They work. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
So...
Don't touch this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I've never heard anyone talk about this kind of setup, so I need to try them myself as well, because it seems like a good solution. Okay, I wanted to ask you, because it seems that you're kind of in this niche, on the border between DSP research and implementation in C++ and whatnot. And I was just curious, do you use any research resources in your day-to-day work? Do you read scientific papers? I know that you attended the DevX conference this year, but what are the ones that you would say that you reach out for them most often?
So I don't really. No, I'm not. I read papers, but I feel like the skill of reading papers is to find the 20% of it that you actually have to read. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of value in a paper because the paper is rigorous, right? They prove everything. But as someone who you don't need to inspect every dotted I. Actually being able to dive into a paper and be like, oh, that's what it's saying. It's just encoded into 4 pages of quite dense text and equations. And so I don't read that many papers, but I think it's very useful to be able to keep up with the ideas. So something like, okay, as an example, anti-derivative anti-aliasing. That paper was so cool. It's at this point, it's sort of now entered the lexicon of standards. That's, of course you do this. But I remember when I read it, it really challenged me to fit these ideas into my head, and the way that it was dealing with continuous and discrete time was really, really fascinating. And so every now and again, I sort of bump up against a paper and kind of really, really consume the whole thing. And then a lot of the time you come across a paper or someone asks you about something and you skim through it and you spend about 2 minutes reading it and you're like, right, yes, they're doing this. Because, there's it's a bit like when I said earlier that, I think quite visually, but I do believe that if push came to shove, I could write down the equations for what I'm doing, because I have that mathematical background. That wasn't always the case, but I've now developed the formalized vocabulary to explain the rules and things that I already knew. But you don't need that to do a lot of stuff. And so you can absolutely cowboy your way through. That's maybe the wrong word, because it's not unrigorous, but you can really, you don't need to read every word of a paper, as long as you can actually read the important bits. And often there's sort of incremental improvements or that kind of thing going on. So I would say I don't spend a lot of time reading papers. I skim read a lot of papers, enough to kind of put the ideas into the big stew in my head. But it's not a significant a portion of my time. I quite like instead creating stuff from scratch without first checking how it's done. And I mean, that's, again, as I said, I had the luxury of learning pretty much all of DSP like that. But that's still my preferred way to work.
Okay, I think it's a very, very ambitious approach, but also that gives you an in-depth understanding. I'm just, curious because in an interview that I did with Julian Parker, he said that, this approach works very well in DSP, but it unfortunately, like in his opinion, it doesn't apply, to deep learning. Like in deep learning, like it's really hard to start, from tiny bricks and build up, like this huge thing. But I'd be really interested to see if you do anything deep learning related in the future and what kind of approach you use there.
So you mean like sort of the machine learning AI space? Yeah, that's not something I know the mathematical basis of it, and I've, written a perceptron and all that kind of thing. But I've not something I've personally had a lot of motivation for. I think because of the black box nature of it, it's cool the way that like you just design the shape of this network to kind of in some way reflect the problem, but then you throw a few hundred hours of computing at it and you end up with a bunch of coefficients that solve the problem, and you're like, great. Like if I want a better one, do I make it bigger? This, and personally, I'm not against machine learning. It can do very cool stuff, but it's also, that would be where my understanding stopped.
But I think also, as you said, like you probably would not find it interesting simply, from this perspective. Yeah, for sure. And okay, and still on the DSP note, I wanted to ask you, when you write your DSP code, how do you verify that it's working?
That's a really good question. So like the more nuts and bolts stuff, I mean, automated tests is just, I think I should be even more religious about them than I currently am. You want to prove that the basics of what you're doing work. And I actually had a horrifying experience recently because some things were going wrong. Like some people were getting like weird results when they put like the fast math optimizations on, and I was like, I test all my code, and they're like, yeah, but and I eventually traced it down on my FFT implementation that I wrote was giving incorrect results, and like my world shook because you have to test all of this stuff so rigorously. Turns out there's a bug in Apple Clang version 16. So don't move to the latest Xcode yet if you can avoid it. Genuinely, there's a bug.
Too late. It's too late. I've updated this morning.
Oh no! It generates incorrect SIMD code. That's not the point. Anyway, but the point is like you want to be that confident in your bread and butter tools that that if there is a bug, it's not, oh, egg on my face. It's the world is shaken and it might be the compiler's fault. Genuinely. Like that shouldn't be the first answer. But like that's where you want your basic tools to be. I will say that like testing more complex DSP setups beyond that is very difficult, both in terms of like just, you can do integration tests and so on, but like, how do you know it's right? Defining success in that kind of setup is very difficult. How do you know that a chorus is working? Well, because it sounds like a chorus. It's a difficult problem. If there's a better way to do all that, I think there's been a bunch of talks and stuff because I think it's an area lots of people are interested in. So I think the answer is that mostly I try and get my ingredients as rock solid as I can, automated tests all the way, and then be very careful when you're putting them together. But it would be great if you could verify, write a test that goes, yes, this is a reverb and it sounds nice, But at the end of the day, we're half engineers and half artists when we're designing algorithms. So it's a tough one.
Okay, Matt, thank you very much for this answer, and I hope it encourages more people to write automated tests. And still on the technology side, I was curious to ask, what is your current tech stack? So, which programming languages do you use? Which IDE are you using? You said you're on Mac, so that determines your operating system.
Yeah, well, I quite like the Unix thing. I was on Linux for a while. I've used that at work. A lot of embedded stuff is on Linux, and I basically use Xcode. And I'm not going to hold it up and say it's the best, but I mostly use it as a text editor, right? I think I don't use a lot of, even when I had them in other setups, I didn't use a lot of the advanced features and code analysis and that kind of thing. Maybe I should, but personally, I want a nice text editor with code highlighting, and then whatever works. And once it works, don't touch it. Is sort of my feeling. Yeah. That's where I am. When I was on Windows, I used to use Notepad++. I'm not holding this up as better than anything else, but I think that's kind of my point. Is that you can get by with very little if you're kind of writing your stuff in a structured way, and you're I mean, mostly we're writing code. It's text. You want a text editor, and yeah.
I agree. And do you write mostly then in C++ nowadays?
I do, yes. So at this point, I quite like it as a language. At some point, I'll absolutely join the crab cult, but Rust for people who aren't in on the joke. But for now, I write a lot of C++. It's sort of the current lingua franca of a lot of audio development. So yeah, that's where I am.
So it means that you've doubled into Rust already?
Not enough to say I'm a Rust programmer or that I know Rust. It's more that I think it's a good language, and the security aspects and various other guarantees means that I hope that one day I am forced with a crowbar to move into Rust, but I'm not doing it now in a hurry. But it looks like a cool language. But for now, C++, and I quite like it actually. But whatever works, that's the thing. I, as I said, bounced off C++, and if someone had told me, well, no, you have to learn this because that's what audio stuff is written in, then I would have been given a huge disadvantage. Instead, I used Python. I did a bit of C sound, didn't really get on with it, but I found the Reaper thing that worked. Other people have other things that they find work, and I think they're getting that momentum going and keeping it means that when I made that leap from the Reaper JSFX language over to C++, I had a lot more backing. I had a lot more confidence in what I'd be able to make when I got there, and I think that is so much more important than a specific tech stack and specific language that you're using. Whatever you can get working fastest to get that audio, to get that feedback going, get that satisfaction, because that's what keeps you going.
Nice. And do you use Juice, the Juice C++ framework?
I don't, actually. When I said I went to a couple of meetups, first one, I turned up and was awkwardly milling around with the pizza on a paper plate, and turned to the chap next to me and said, "So what's your connection to this?" And he said, "I'm Jules." And I was like, "Oh, Jules who?" So no, I'm not a Juice person. Again, it looks like a huge dependency, which I would have trouble with. And so when I did my first gig, that first paid Reverb thing, I tried to get the VST3 SDK working. And in the end, I wrote a command line tool. Like, I wrote the C++ class with just like, a configure method and like a reset and process, because that's all you really need. And some parameter smoothing and whatever. But like, and then I wrote a thin wrapper that read, processed, and wrote 16-bit WAV files. Right? And it was like the simplest possible thing that could process audio that wrapped around the thing that I really needed to deliver, which was this kind of framework-free thing. And that's definitely been more of my approach, that like frameworks are really helpful, and if you get on with them and you find that they speed you up, fantastic. I find them quite intimidating. And so I've done a lot of my development kind of from very minimal stuff, because like, again, I don't do the front end most of the time. I don't do UIs. I can hand over an opaque block of DSP code. And so that's why I've not so far needed Juice, even though it's a good project.
Yeah, I understand. I think also the DSP part appeared later in Juice, so it also shows, the fact why Juice was created, like to help people, just focus on the DSP and like leave, plugin formats handling, etc., to the framework itself. Okay, and finally, on this note, I wanted to ask you, because I think people see you as a successful person, regardless whether you consider yourself successful or not. And from this perspective, could you give any advice, to people how to get started in audio programming? Like, what are the resources? Like, what should be the next step? I know we've touched a little bit on this already, but are there any thoughts on this that you might have still?
So when in my more introspective moments, I would say, yeah, I am successful in that, like, I do this for a living, and that's the goal, right? Like, that's the dream is to be handed interesting problems and get to solve them. And somehow, magically, that pays for groceries. In terms of resources, I don't really know what to recommend, because I don't think my path is very relatable, well, try going back to age 12 and then getting your dad to teach you. It's not like useful advice for a lot of people. But also, the world is a lot more, there are more resources out there. Like in the 90s, there wasn't online courses. There weren't this kind of thing. And I think I'd go back again to the people. I know that that's not like the resource that you're going to learn everything one-to-one, but whatever resource you're using, having people you can ask when you get stuck is the most powerful thing you can have in terms of learning resources, really. That's what I would say. And it was I didn't have that, and it would have been very cool to. It would have been very interesting to have a context for that learning.
Yeah, I can totally understand. Yeah. Okay, and is there, anything that comes to your mind if someone said, hey, I also want to start freelancing, and like, is there any specific bit of advice that you would give them?
Don't undervalue yourself. Like, I think it's very easy to look at someone who can do a lot more than you on a particular axis and say, well, they're there, I'm here, so I should be charging, a fifth of them? And like, I have essentially paid someone to write a big CMake file for me, because I'm just like, I'm not doing that. Right? You know, I've got my areas in which I'm incredibly good at what I do. Like, I'm not. I know that there are things that I'm actually really quite skilled at, and there are things that I'm terrible at. And so I think you have value way earlier in your learning journey than you think. And yeah, I think that's just my tip there.
Thank you. And I think, you know, people will find all your tips, you know, in this interview very, very valuable. Okay, so this concludes kind of, you know, our serious technical questions, and now it's time for some more fun questions. And the first one of these is that, you know, apart from programming, I was really amazed that you've published 3 music albums where you sing and play instruments, and some of these instruments you created yourself. And, you know, is it kind of a way for you to relax from work?
It definitely was one of the like creative outlets. But I think there was a long period when I wasn't doing anything music related for work either. Mm-hmm. And so I'd get home from work, and what I wanted to do was either DSP coding, or I'd write music. I'd play the piano. What I found is that, like, actually now that I'm doing more audio development, like, that creative part of my brain that makes music is also kind of being used to do a lot of the DSP stuff. So I found myself slowing down with, like, you know, I still write stuff. I think I haven't released anything recently just because the pace has slowed down. And also I have a 3-year-old, you know, life gets busy. But it was definitely that kind of, it was a compulsion more than a hobby, you know. And it was fun to explore. I did some work experience as a mix engineer with the mix engineer for just a few days, like, because I was mixing my own stuff and thought I might want to go into it, and it was really good fun. But at the end of the day, I think it wasn't quite the obsession. Mm-hmm. So.
Understand. And nowadays, do you have any other activities to rest and recharge?
I wish I could say yes. Life's pretty busy at the moment. I really like having a family. It's really nice to do stuff together. Like, I have less time now, but that's less time that's, you know, not assigned. So I don't know. I go for walks a lot. My son Stefan has started to. He tells me about things. I have conversations with him. It's really good. And yeah, I mean, I also do fun coding, but at the end of the day, yeah, I actually can't think of anything that I'd want to do more than audio programming with a lot of my time. So once I moved into doing it professionally, I did have that kind of crisis of hobby of like, well, this is my job now, so what was my hobby again? Yeah, rest and recharge. I think sleep. Pretty much where it is.
Do you teach your son DSP already?
No, but he does have a little plastic microphone with like a spring in it, like a little tiny spring reverb, and he sings into it, which is fantastic.
Nice. And do you listen to music while you're programming?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm not going to say it's good music. Like some of it is. Got really into 2 Steps from Hell and that kind of thing, and that's for a while. That's really fun. Then I went through a phase of listening to those like Above and Beyond, like the group therapy mixes, where it's just like 3 hours of continuous dance music. At the moment, I'm listening to a huge amount of drum and bass, which I think my partner might be getting a bit tired of because she can hear it from her office. I think, yeah, but it's more so that nothing else distracts me. You know, it's whatever it is. It's familiar. It generally has a lot of energy and a lot of beat, and then I kind of like resurface at the end of the day and have to like sit quietly for about 20 minutes, which is
I understand. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Geraint. I'm really, really thankful for this interview. I think a lot of people will find this very, very helpful and definitely inspiring, to push their own interests, to follow their own dreams, not to sound, overly epic in this. And thank you for being honest in all your opinions and sincere in sharing your career so far. The last question that I have is that if someone wanted to contact you, where do you recommend they go?
Well, firstly, you can just Google me, either as Geraint, if you can spell it, Geraint Luff, or as Signalsmith, all one word, like locksmith or silversmith. But yeah, Signalsmith Audio is, we're out there. I forget which social platforms are on, but basically email is always classic. And of course, I'm on Discord on a few different groups, but most often the Audio Programmer Discord.
Okay, nice. We'll link to these in the episode notes. So thank you once again, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors.
Great. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. That was Geraint Luff, a freelance audio DSP engineer from the UK. Thank you, Geraint, for agreeing on this interview and your positive spirit. To you, the listener, all the people, places, and references mentioned in this podcast episode can be found in the episode notes at thewolfsound.com/talk027. Once again, it's thewolfsound.com/talk027. And remember, if you want to help the podcast, then please subscribe to the WolfSound channel on YouTube and give thumbs up to this video. Consider leaving up to a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and suggesting in the comments on YouTube or on the blog who should be the next guest. Don't forget to check out my DSP Pro online course on learning digital audio signal processing at wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-pro. Once again, it's wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-pro. It's an all-in-one resource to learn digital audio signal processing from the fundamentals up to advanced topics. Thanks for listening and see you in the next one. Take care.